I'm speaking today with Robert Sanders. He is Doctor of Law and Policy and an Associate Professor and Chair of National Security at the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences at the University of New Haven. Professor Sanders, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So there's been some talk, I guess. We're hearing about a lot of mounting lawsuits and litigation against China. What is that all about? Why is that happening, and what form is it taking?
Well, there's a couple of different avenues that are in play right now. So, of course, there's the international law process. So, based on China's failure to properly follow World Health Organization regulations, some nations, and in the United States, some AGs, attorney generals in states, have brought suits against China for the damages that they've suffered from COVID-19. The problems arise with this on the domestic level when you start thinking about sovereign immunity. So sovereign immunity is a doctrine that says as a state, a nation state, they are immune from suit by other nation states and subsequent parts of nation states. That doctrine is active law in the United States. Now, a couple of senators have put forth legislation to reduce China's sovereign immunity and to give our state AGs and others the ability to then sue them in U.S. courts. The problem with that is once we go down that road, you should expect, and China will respond by seeking to reduce our sovereign immunity protections in their own country.
Drag us into their courts.
And drag us into their courts and sue us in innumerable ways for how we conduct our business. Mm-hmm. Now, the other way to do this is to have the United States move forward as an international body for the same reasons, violations of World Health regs and what they did, in a similar way that China was sued by the Philippines for violations of its fishing grounds in the South China Sea.
In what forum did that take place?
Well, that actually went to a court that's associated with the international maritime environment. There's a specific court that regulates how the world gathers fishing, maritime transportation under a particular regulation. And that court has had a tribunal, which the Philippines took their case to. Mm-hmm. The Philippines actually won their case at this tribunal. However, in a pragmatic move, one which I'm disappointed that they decided to go in that route, they then capitulated basically to China, even with the win, and said, okay, well, what are you going to do now that you've let us, that we've won? We're not going to enforce our victory. Tell us what you're going to do for us. And let China dictate the terms.
Good luck with that, right?
Well, for their purposes, China did back off and let them back into some of their own fishing grounds and pull back some of the Chinese Coast Guard, the militaristic Coast Guard. Their Coast Guard is much more militaristic than ours. Ours is more of a policing force with a military basis. So they did get something positive out of it, but they could have gotten more if they just tried to enforce their victory. Now, how do you enforce the victory? If you're a small state and a big state, and you think about the instruments of national power, we call it the dime fill: diplomacy, information, military, economics, financial, intelligence, and law. Which one of those things can you, small state, enforce against big state in order to get what you now deserve or what you earned in your lawsuit. Philippines didn't have many avenues other than to seek help from other big states like the US. And they decided, based on their proximity to China and some of the other things that were happening in Asia, that they would throw their lot in, at least in this case, with China.
So there's no civil equivalent then, is there, of, I don't know if I have this down, the name of this exactly right, but the International Criminal Court in The Hague. There's no civil equivalent of that where these types of complaints can be litigated?
And that would be the ISJ. In The Hague, there's also the ISJ.
Oh, okay. So that's also in The Hague. I see.
Yes, it is. And so that court is a court where, for instance, Nicaragua took the United States for our mining of their harbors that they said was illegal, when we were saying, well, it's not illegal. We were trying to help another country that asked us for help. The facts actually turned differently, and we, the United States, were found to be in violation and owed the country, Nicaragua, sued us for our failures and transgressions in that case. So yes, there is a civil way to go. Of course, at the end of the day, how do you enforce your victory? Either it's voluntarily complied with, or you have some forcing mechanism.
Yeah. And the burden of proof on you to litigate against China for supposed negligence in its treatment of the COVID-19 virus, I imagine that would be a pretty immense burden. I mean, you'd have to have people on the scene. You'd have to be able to somehow prove that that was happening. That's got to be a pretty tall order, right?
Well, to an extent, because the World Health regulations require that China do certain things. They should they're required to give certain notices to the World Health Organization and others if, in fact, they have a contagious disease like they had in their country. And it's clear that while China gave some information, they didn't give full information. And it was evident that they were stonewalling in it to an extent as they tried to figure out what direction they wanted to go and how they wanted to spin this. And in the interim, people died. People died, economies were disrupted, and other countries then did not know how to properly respond because they were not understanding the magnitude of what they're about to face.
So what's going to happen in your estimation? Are we really going to open up this whole can of worms and try to remove sovereign immunity for China and other countries and all the retaliation that might come of that? Is that going to happen, or is it just going to be business as usual and people are just making a lot of noise right now?
I don't think it'll be business as usual, but understanding that the United States is in an election year and politicians are politicians. There are things that they're going to do on the home front for home consumption, whether or not at the end of the day, it could actually turn into what we should want, which is rightful claims paid to people who suffered because of China's mistakes in this case. And oh, by the way, there's potentially a mitigation for China, at least in the United States' case. We have 6 weeks where we failed to act when we should have been acting based on the limited information we did have. We had some medical intelligence from a medical intelligence unit. We had some information from Americans who were on the ground, who work for the CDC, and other sources. And at the same time, we had parts of the executive branch telling us that there's nothing wrong here. It's all smoke and mirrors. Don't worry about it. It's going to disappear.
Doesn't that open us up to liability as well, though? In a way, could we not be sued?
To mitigate.
I see.
It's a mitigating factor. So how much damage could have been avoided if you had acted when you had knowledge to act? So in any civil case, there's a mitigation factor. What did you do, and what should you have done to lessen the damages that were suffered? We have a 6-week gap there.
But do you think there really is an appetite for the removal of sovereign immunity in Congress right now? Do you think there's a chance of that happening?
Well, I hope not. The secondary effects of that are tremendous and far-reaching. And I understand the posturing, and I am, along with everyone else, would like to see those who can be made somewhat whole. You can't bring back to life loved ones who've been lost, but civil litigation is generally about making someone pay financially for their transgressions.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could do that, I'd love to do that. And so I offer an alternative. So rather than spend all this time making my lawyer colleagues rich in the process of trying to litigate something that may be dead infant at the start, why don't we take and learn from disasters in the past? So in Bhopal, India, when a company, oil and gas company, had a tremendous disaster and killed lots and lots of people, they paid the survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And after 9/11, the United States prepared and provided a fund to pay survivors. And in the process, we sued other states in U.S. court under terrorism acts and paid survivors from those states' assets. Wouldn't it be interesting if the world body under that diplomacy part of our national security policy and our national instruments of power got the world to band together to say to China, well, you need to put together a fund from your tremendous economic wealth and be prepared to pay out to all of those nations, not companies, but individual people, into a fund that would try to make some of these folks whole. And that fund would be mitigated by what the individual countries failed to do in addressing this based on the knowledge that they had.
Well, it sounds like an interesting alternative, and it certainly would be a lot neater and lead to a lot less ramifications down the line. But Professor Robert Sanders, University of New Haven, I want to thank you so much for shining some light on this potentially troubling topic and offering a possible solution to it. So thank you very much for talking to me today. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here.
Take care.
Take care.